Minneapolis, Grand Rapids. Danny, how are you? Um, Seeing what else is going on here. I just got over here. Quite a day, huh? Quite a couple of days. Quite a couple of weeks, actually. Thank you for being here. We got Virginia, Minnesota again, Sweden, Central Valley in California, Metro Atlanta, Portland, Oregon. It's really cold here, by the way. Hingham, Mass, with the beautiful church. Columbus, Ohio. I love Columbus. Monterey Bay. Here we go. Wisconsin, Maui. Oh man, man. All right. So I am here obviously on Facebook today. I'm working on the YouTube thing. I just will confess to you, I really care about content. I'm less good with technology, so I'm not moving as fast on that front as I could be, but I will work on that. Okay. So let me get right into things with where we are on this moment, January 28th, 2025. We are in the middle of a constitutional crisis. And it's not an immediate, as in you got to do something right this very moment, but it's very, very serious. And let me start by stepping back and explaining once again the three branches of government that are established in the Constitution, that is the underpinning for all the laws in the United States. That is, there are three branches of government. And the first among equals, if you will, is the Congress. And the Congress is made up of two different chambers, two different branches, the House of Representatives and the Senate. And those two branches together are supposed to write our laws. So the House of Representatives turns over completely every 2 years with the hope that it would be very responsive to the American people. And the Senate turns over every 2 years, only a third of it does. The complete revolution of the Senate is every 6 years, although always it has had people stay there forever. I think I said to you once that until at least recently, I haven't checked the numbers recently, the only legislative body that turned over more slowly than the U.S. Senate was the House of Lords in the UK. So you have those two branches, and they are supposed to be the lawmaking body of the United States. So they can initiate laws, but each house has to approve of the laws. And there's one exception to the fact that people can initiate laws, and that's that the House of Representatives is the only place where revenue bills can start. And you can imagine the framers of the Constitution being concerned about taxes and the things that they had come out against with the king. So they made sure that the people would be the ones who were, the people's representatives would be the ones who would start revenue bills. So the House and the Senate make the laws. And then it doesn't become a law just if the House and Senate says they want a law. It has to go to the president, which is the head of the executive branch, which is the second of the branches of government if you look at the way the Constitution was written. And in Article 2, the framers set out the duties and the rights of the president. And the president can sign the bill into law, in which case it becomes a law, or can veto it, can say, no, I don't like this. At that point, the president almost always, there's one exception, but has to send it back to the Congress and say, here's why I don't like this law, which is actually really interesting for people like me. And the Congress can either go, oh yeah, oopsie poopsie, we made a mistake, which they almost never do, by the way. Or they can say, okay, we can overcome your objections and repass the law in such a way that you'll sign it. Or they can say, take a hike, we liked this law the way it was, and they can pass it over the president's veto, but that takes a supermajority to do that. Those are the two branches of government that make laws. And then, as I always joke, there's this third branch of government, and that's the judiciary. And by the time the framers got around to forming the judiciary, I always tease my students and say, well, by then, after they'd given all these things that the House is supposed to do and all these things that the Senate is supposed to do as the legislative branch, and then all the things that the executive was supposed to do, they're like really bored, and they're like, we got to go home. We're tired. We're hungry. Let's have a judiciary. And they walk away. Because in the Constitution, the judiciary is only given the power to adjudicate things between states and between the federal government, the United States of America, and other countries. But what happens is in 1803, with the case of Marbury versus Madison, the Supreme Court, under Supreme Court Chief Justice John Marshall, who is one of our great Chief Justices, took upon itself the right of what's called judicial review. And that is, they took upon themselves the right to say whether or not a law was constitutional. They were the ones who got to decide that. And that's, at first the people didn't pay much attention to that, and sometimes it's been challenged. But really, since 1803, the Supreme Court has been able to decide whether or not a law is unconstitutional. And if the Supreme Court says, nah, really not, then they can declare it unconstitutional, and the Congress can get back to work and write a law that is constitutional according to that Supreme Court. Now, those are the three branches of government as they have been set out in the Constitution of the United States and as we have lived with them since that Constitution was signed. So what is going on right now, beginning on last Friday, is that the Trump administration is denying that order. They are working with a different concept of the executive branch that began to be developed under the Reagan administration. And one of the people who really pushed this was Samuel Alito, who at the time was in the Justice Department and now, of course, is on the Supreme Court. And what they argue is this. They argue that because the president is the head of the executive branch, that the president in that column cannot be checked. The president is all powerful. And so the other branches of government can't say, well, you can't do that. And the president can decide for himself whether or not laws are constitutional and whether or not the things that the Congress does, whether or not he's going to fulfill them. Now, this is deeply problematic, not least because the president takes an oath to make the laws happen. I can't believe I can't think of the wording right now. To defend the laws of the United States and to make sure they're put into effect. But it's also a problem because, in fact, the way the Constitution is written, the Congress has a check on the president. And that's the place you start to see the rise of this concept of what's called the unitary executive is in the 1980s, when it's very clear that dismantling the federal government, as the Reagan Revolution people wanted to do, is really unpopular. So they start to try and find ways that they can do what they want, even if the American people don't like it. So they begin to stack the judiciary with ideological right-wingers. They begin to suppress the vote, and they begin to make this argument for the unitary executive. Okay, you with me so far, I hope? Nobody is answering, so maybe. I hope you're with me. All right, so what happened on last week, on Friday, first of all, was that, and mind you, it's really interesting to me how vague a lot of what's going on is. And believe me, I would know, because after doing the Trump administration and the Biden administration and the new Trump administration, if you wanted to know what the Biden administration was doing, there was always a document or a statement somewhere so that things were very clear. It's the Trump administration is not operating the same way. There are things that are just fuzzy and you can't find anybody to clarify them. So what they did on Friday was they halted funding for foreign aid, and a broad range of foreign aid. And that was really, really astonishing, first of all, because foreign aid is appropriated by Congress. Congress writes the laws that appropriate money. That's one of their jobs, to do that. And the Trump administration said they were pausing aid until they could make sure that all the aid that was distributed was done in according to what Trump cared about, which is, he want all this, no DEI and all the stuff he wants. So this was like a bombshell, because if you know anything about our foreign affairs, you know that since World War II, beginning under Eisenhower, there was a real concerted effort to focus on diplomacy. And Eisenhower was a Republican, by the way, he's elected in 1952. Eisenhower recognized that if you did not make it possible for people around the world to have a rising standard of living, they would be easy prey for religious extremists or political extremists like Hitler to come in and turn them into a cult, essentially. And in an era in which there were nuclear weapons, this would mean the end of the world. So he began really to focus on funding countries who were experiencing starvation or who needed some help with their legal systems and so on. And he won in 1952 the primary in the Republican primary against Senator Robert Taft of Ohio, who insisted on isolationism and said, let them deal with it themselves, which to Eisenhower was going to mean that we were going to have extremes in politics. And everybody focuses on Eisenhower's anti-communism, which is true. And by the way, he made some mistakes. Everybody does. But he was also the world's first anti-fascist, right? That's what he had fought against in Europe. And that's what really made him a convert to this idea, was seeing the prison camps. And from the Holocaust, and saying we have to find a way to make sure this doesn't happen again. So since 1952, and before that, by the way, the Democrats had the Marshall Plan, for example, but there has been this idea that the United States would work to stabilize countries around the world, not because we're touchy-feely, although it does feel good to make sure babies don't starve, but also so that those countries would remain stable and be good trading partners for the United States. And that's just been what we do. So when Trump on Friday, he didn't pause that funding, he stopped it. What that meant was that the places, for example, where George W. Bush started what's known as PEPFAR, the attempt to stop the spread of AIDS in Africa, or right now, I don't know if you're following the situation in Sudan, it is simply heartbreaking. The funding for feeding the starving Sudanese, or places where they were clearing landmines, or places where they were supporting food delivery, or places where they were training people to stand against ISIS, or, all the sorts of things that we do that people like you and me don't pay a lot of attention to, just stopped. So all those places are suddenly standing there going, we don't know what we're going to do, because, for example, what do you do with the ISIS prisons, which we're funding to keep the ISIS people in prison? They're going to get them let go. And what about the people who are now have hired people to find landmines who now can't? And most dramatically, of course, the funding that we have put into development projects in developing countries as a hedge against, first of all, with luck, in a way that will help those developing countries, especially across the middle of Africa. But by pulling that, what we are doing is saying to other countries, A, you can't trust us, and B, if China wants to do this, why don't you go play with China? Which is a really dramatic abdication of the role that the United States has played in the world since World War II. And of course, a complete dismissal of everything that Biden and Blinken tried to do to create a better global structure that supported the needs of everybody in the country, but in the world, but also that really made sure the United States had a seat at the table. We've just walked away from every single table, with the exception of the fact that the Trump administration continued to fund munitions for Israel and for Egypt. All right. So that was Friday. And then yesterday, last night, really late. I'm sorry, you know me, I've lost track of time already because I'm writing in different eras here. Trump did something else that built on that. So if you remember on Friday, I think it was on Friday, he fired the inspectors general from 17 different departments, major departments in the country. I wrote about that. It's actually quite interesting how we got inspectors general. But the reason that that's really important is because he tried that in his first administration. He fired, I think it was 5 major inspectors general whom he thought were disloyal to him after his first acquittal from his first impeachment. And when that happened in 2022, Congress wrote a law aimed at making sure he couldn't do it again. And they said that if you want to fire an inspector general, which, Obama did it too, the inspector general that he fired was really erratic, and that's, but he did do it. And you don't want to fire inspectors general if you can possibly avoid it, because they're from outside and they're basically watchdogs for the departments. But Congress in 2022 wrote a law that said if you want to fire inspectors general, you have to give Congress 30 days notice, and you have to explain why you're firing them. Trump didn't do that. He just blew that off. And some of the Republicans who voted for that bill said they didn't care, including Tom Cotton of Arkansas, by the way, a senator from Arkansas. So what Trump apparently heard was go ahead and break the law. So what we saw Monday, I'm sorry, today is Tuesday. So what we saw Monday was that Trump stopped the funding for everything, every federal grant and loan in the United States of America. So think of anything the federal government does with, as I say, some exceptions. He says this does not include Social Security and Medicare, which makes sense because he promised up and down he wouldn't do that, and that's much of his base. But think of everything else. This is federal grants to local law enforcement. This is grants to states. This is education. This is Medicaid. This is supplemental nutrition programs, including women, infants, and children. The WIC, if you know WIC, it's a great program. This is Head Start. This is, I could just keep on going. And here's the kicker. How can he do that? I mean, I can't tell you how many people have come up to me today and said he can't do that. It's against the law. Well, it is against the law because this is what's called impoundment. And impoundment was an attempt under Richard Nixon in the early 1970s to stop Congress from doing things he didn't like by saying, I don't care that you appropriated money to create this agency. I'm just not going to disperse that money. So you can create whatever you want, but I'm not going to put up any money to fund that. And you need to remember when I'm telling you this, that funding is your money. It is your money. It is my money. This is money that you pay into the federal government. So often we talk about, federal funding, and we don't seem to talk about taxes at the same time. And, taxes are really my thing. I love the study of taxes and it makes me sound like the most boring person in the world, which might be true. But when you talk about taxes, you are talking about what a society thinks is important enough to put money into. So when Nixon said, I'm not going to fund these things, he was saying, listen, I don't care what Congress said it wants to spend your tax dollars on. I, Richard Nixon, don't think that's a good way to do it. And Congress said, oh boy, is this not going to fly. So in 1974, they passed something called the Impoundment Control Act that said, and I paraphrase, screw you, you're not doing that. That's a paraphrase. What they said was a president may not impound monies that the Congress has appropriated for whatever purpose. You just got to do it. You have to make sure the laws are carried out. That's what the president agrees to do. So the right-wing movement in the United States of America, led in this moment by Heritage, the Heritage Foundation, which has very close ties to Viktor Orban in Hungary, says they consider that law unconstitutional. They consider that law unconstitutional. They consider that law unconstitutional. I bet you have some favorite laws you consider unconstitutional too, right? My point being that Trump has just signed on to the idea that is laid out in Project 2025 that the Impoundment Act is unconstitutional. It's a law. And courts have upheld this law repeatedly since 1974, saying Congress is the lawmaking body. If it says we're going to put $100,000 toward developing a new kind of Brussels sprout, which I'm making up, they may or may not have done that, that's what the people's representatives decided to do. Trump is saying, no, I don't care that Congress thinks we should fund cancer research. I don't care that Congress thinks we should fund supplemental nutrition programs. I don't care that Congress thinks we should fund law enforcement. I don't care that Congress thinks we should we should fund education. He is saying the person who gets to decide what we do is him. I want to make sure that sinks in deeply enough. He is saying that the person who gets to decide what this government is going to fund is him. So let me now step back from that a little bit and give you not necessarily a bigger picture, because that's a really big picture, but a picture of where we are in this 2 week period. Because I think what we have seen is somebody's asking what's going to happen and what do we do next. I'm going to come to that, I promise. But I do think the setup here is important, because this is a constitutional crisis. And it looks very much like an earlier period in our history before we had a constitution that I'll talk about. But this other piece that I want to tell you about matters too. And that's that if you remember when he was running for office, and you must keep in mind that this president is mentally slipping badly. That really matters. He is not playing with a full deck. He is, I can't think of any other way to put it. You have to understand that he is not the evil genius here. He's a man who loves money, appears to like to have women around him, and who wants to stay out of jail and wants to be loved, which, he likes adulation. I don't think he knows what love is. That was an editorial I shouldn't have given you. He wants adulation, but he doesn't have the capacity to put these pieces together. He really doesn't, which does raise the question of who is putting them together. But if you think about Project 2025, which we talked about a lot last summer before the election, and the Trump and his people distanced themselves from, they said, no, we got nothing to do with Project 2025. Well, of course they did. And now 2/3 of the executive orders and the things he's done that he's put in place are straight from Project 2025, including his office, or the person he wants to install at the head of Office of Management and Budget, Russ Vought, who was instrumental in writing in the Heritage Foundation, and instrumental in writing Project 2025. And what Project 2025 called for was for the president to get rid of the nonpartisan civil service, which we've had since 1883, and make it loyal to him. It called for getting rid of the independence of the Department of Justice and making it loyal to the president. And it called for getting rid of the independence of the military and making it loyal to the president. And once you had that in place, you wanted a very strong executive who would impose Christian nationalism on the United States of America. In the last it's only been 8 days, what we have seen is exactly that. We have seen the purging of the nonpartisan civil service to make it loyal to Trump. We have seen the purging of the Department of Justice to make it loyal to Trump. There was a big purge of people yesterday. Joyce White Vance wrote about it last night. And we've seen the attempt to have control of the military by putting over it Pete Hegseth, who is a radical right-wing Christian extremist, studied at Princeton under Patrick Deneen, who is one of the right-wing conservative Catholics, not Catholic, right-wing extremist, not conservative, I'm sorry, right-wing extremist Catholics like J.D. Vance and like Peter Thiel, who want to destroy the federal government in order to put in place right-wing Christian nationalism. So we've got those three things in place, and now we have the attempt to destroy the secular government that we have had in place, that we have built, that you and I have built by electing our representatives, and to destroy it. We don't know what they plan to put in place, but this is a destruction of our constitutional system. And a number of Republicans are vocally going along with it, saying that they think private philanthropy, for example, is a better way to fund cancer than, which is just, I'm sorry, it's just, I won't swear, I'm sorry, it's just crap. I mean, I could start citing studies, but it just doesn't work. The reason we built the government that we did is because this is how you deliver to the American people, who have joined together. We, the people, have joined together to form a union to create a government that does the best it can for the most of us. That's what the United States government is. And what they are coming in is saying, no, we're going to get rid of that because our guy, Donald Trump, although, as I say, I don't think he is the one pulling the strings here, is the one who should make the final decisions. So right there, we have ourselves a constitutional crisis. And let me walk a little bit further um, on further. And now I'm telling you not what has happened, but what certainly seems like it's going to happen because they have said it's going to happen. So what is he doing? And I think there are a number of things he's doing. I think one is they are provoking a constitutional crisis, and I will tell you more about that in a second. I think they are also, I think somewhere they have figured that if they stop all this funding, that will put enough money back in the treasury that they can have their tax cuts for the very wealthy and corporations, which Trump's new Treasury Secretary, Scott Bessent, has agreed is the top priority for the Trump administration. But it's been a big problem for the radical right-wing extremists because they're like, we don't like how much spending is going on here. Well, they're the same ones who want to get rid of the secular government. So if you get rid of the secular government and you say, we're clawing back all that money, we're going to throw it in the treasury, now we can give all the money to the rich people and corporations, it kind of is an equation that cancels a lot of stuff out. Is that how you want your tax dollars to be spent? To have them go into the pockets of the very wealthy and corporations. Remember, from 1981 to 2021, about $50 trillion went from the bottom 90% to the top 1%. So I think they are partly doing that as well. Now, what they're going to fill those holes with is anybody's guess. So if that's what they are doing so far. Now, let me go back to, and like I say, I don't think about, I keep talking about power sloshing around in Washington. If Trump is not, I mean, Trump's already talking about a third term. You know, that's like me. I suppose he could live forever, but come on, he's 78 years old. He's a wreck now. I'm not expecting that's going to happen. I think what they're doing more clearly is putting all this in place for somebody else to take over and then say, hey, we didn't do this. This is just what this is all Trump's fault, and throw the bag on him. So when you think about power sloshing around, who is that? Who are the people calling the shots? I don't know. I've been thinking about this all day, and I think you can see certain fingerprints, but others are not as clear. Whom does it benefit to destroy America's standing around the globe? There's a lot of people that benefit, but there's a lot of people who are benefiting from cutting the government domestically that are hurt by that. So I don't know the answer to that, and I urge you to think about it. But now I want to go back to what we do. Because somebody asked something, and I want to see if I can work into this answer. I told you this looks like something else to me. And you know what it looks like to me? It looks like the attempt of the monarch George III, who, by the way, was also mentally incapacitated on occasion, to force the colonial English settlers to pay taxes without having a say in their government. And if you remember that, and I'll write about that this week because I think it's important. If you remember that, what he did was he put up the British Crown has to pay for all the wars that have taken place, both in Europe and in the United States, not the United States yet, in the colonies. And Americans have not been heavily taxed at all. So after 1763, they chunk a whole bunch of taxes on Americans in a number of different places. One of the places you can see it, there's a couple of rafts of them, but one of the places you can see it is in Pride and Prejudice, the novel. By Jane Austen, when Mr. Collins is pointing out how many windows the Lady Catherine de Bourgh's mansion has, and a modern American reader is like, who cares how many windows? That's because one of the things that was taxed was glass. So by saying, look at all these windows and counting the windows, he's saying, look, she's so rich, she can pay all those taxes. There you go. That's your literary moment of the day. But they chunk on a whole bunch of taxes. And the Americans are like, especially the American merchants are like, what's going on here? Like, we're not paying this crap. We're not represented, and we're not going to do this. But most Americans are, they get rid of most of the taxes gradually because it's not worth it. It's costing more money to collect the taxes than it is than they're making. So they get rid of most of the taxes, but they keep the tax on tea. And they keep the tax on tea for the East India Company. And the East India Company has a subsidy, so they're going to be able to sell tea more cheaply to the United States. I'm sorry, to the colonies. It's not the United States. Forget I said that. To the colonies. And if they flood the colonies with this cheap tea, and the colonists are willing to buy it, the Crown and the Parliament will have established the principle of being able to tax the people without representation. So what do the people who recognize the issues here do? They write and say, stop it. It's one thing to do. But they also talk about it everywhere. They have flyers about it. They literally paint teapots that talk about it. They urge people to move away from tea, and they explain what's going on. And the reason that I'm thinking about that today is because this is bad. And I mean this is bad in a constitutional sense. It's, of course, also bad for anybody who depends in any way on federal money. And I say that as somebody who does not. I am one of the extraordinarily few lucky people in the country right now who doesn't yet need Medicare or Medicaid and who doesn't need grants or all those things. But I'm so rare in that, and it will not last forever. So I'm not like, oh, they took my benefits. I'm telling you that as somebody who cares about the functioning of society, we all care about this. And people need to understand what exactly this means. This means a lot of people are scared right now because they do not know where their paycheck is going to come from. It means people are scared because they do not know how they're going to maintain their elderly relatives in a nursing home, which is usually paid for by Medicaid. There's a lot of damage and a lot of places people are going to be hurt here. They need to understand what the constitutional problem is here and the fact that Trump is trying and his people are trying to set him up to become a dictator. So when you think about what we are going to do next in this, the obvious thing to do is to complain to Congress because they're the ones who are giving up their power. And I'm not going to say not to do that. You should be doing that every second. And I would urge you, certainly cheer on the Democrats. The Democrats are not the problem here. Everybody complains to the Democrats. I've said this to you before. When you get really upset, people complain to me. I can't do anything. I'm already on your side. Complain to the Republicans. Make their lives swamped with constituents and people saying, you took away specifics, you took away Medicaid, you took away WIC, you took away funding for Sudan, you took away all these things, and we are not going to support you going forward. And that needs to be not just people who voted for Kamala Harris, that needs to be everybody. I can think of two people right now who voted for Trump. And when I said that their Medicaid was at risk based on Project 2025, they said he will never touch Medicaid. If you don't think I'm going to be telling them that Medicaid has now been frozen, you're dead wrong. They need to know what is happening because we need to make this a moment where we defend the U.S. Constitution. Do it by pressuring your Congress people, of course, but also do it by doing the same thing that the colonials did. Make sure you cannot not know this is happening, that people must know that this is happening. Because it is, somebody just said we need to stop this madness. It is madness. And when you write to Congress, when you write to the Republican senators, remember, I keep saying this, only about 14 of the Republican senators are MAGA. The other 40 or so are not. They're scared. And they need constantly to hear you are destroying your power, you are destroying the power of the Senate, and you are destroying the American constitutional government. And they must hear it in a huge way starting now, or it will be too late. They're very much testing the waters to see if they can get away with this. As I say, power is sloshing, and now is the time for Americans to say, these are my tax dollars. I mean, you can disagree. You can say, hey, I don't care. I just as soon let Donald Trump decide these things. I think the vast majority of us like the idea of having a Congress, a government, having the Constitution, rather than having a dictator decide what's going to happen. I will point out, of course, that um, we are less than 2 years away from 1776, which I think is really interesting. I think it's time for us to challenge what it means to be part of the United States government and what it means to be part of this country and what it means for the people to have a say in their government. And as you know, the right wing flooded the media. And today, CNN's Jim Acosta left CNN, said he needs to stand against dictatorship. He needs to stand against a tyrant. And now is the time we're going to have to be doing that. So what else did I say I was going to tell you today? That was pretty much it. I would urge you in this to take care of people who are frightened right now, but don't let up. I mean, one of the things you simply cannot do is say, I can't deal with this. I can't look at this. Because again, the number of people who want this country to become a Christian dictatorship, it's about 6% of a country of 332 people, 332 million people. Even if it were 332, it would be okay. 332 million people. If we speak up, they cannot do it. And I think that this is what they're trying to do, is hit so quickly that we don't see what's going on. And I would urge you really to focus at the state level, everywhere for sure, but call on your representatives, call on your Congress people, call on your state people and say, are you really okay with this? Because this is not the American democracy that I knew. We cannot be silent in the midst of this. Call it out. Somebody just said, one of their Congress people said that it was a waste to put money into prosthetics for old people because it was a waste of money. Do you believe that? I don't believe that. Speak up for the things that you care about and that you believe in, and call this one out. Now, I'm sitting here. We have a lot of trolls here. Don't argue with the trolls. Shut them down. Block them. We're not going to have this conversation with them. They are wasting our time. And I'm trying to see, shop for Costco, shop at the people, shop at the stores that are supporting American democracy. Support the people who are supporting American democracy. It does not have to be partisan. At this point, it's absolutely not partisan. Are you with a dictator who is trying to destroy our Constitution, or are you with the American Constitution and our democracy? We can sort the rest out later. I'm seeing if there's anything else. People keep saying, they're frightened and they feel alone. You're not alone. There's 17,000 people here on this call right now. Find your people. You can find your people. The place I always send people is to Red, Wine, and Blue, but you can go to any other organization, or you can just start some of your own. You must not be alone in this, but again, you must speak up. And again, they want you to be frightened. They want you to be so scared you won't speak up. And once they get to that place, then nobody will dare to speak up. But we are not there yet. I talked about this before the other night. Power is sloshing around. In a dictatorship like North Korea, power is not sloshing around. You know exactly who holds that power. Right now, you can still speak up. You can still support independent media. Absolutely. If you have the money to support independent people, don't give it to me, give it to somebody else who can get out there and keep holding truth to power. You can support the people who speak up, and you can come down on the media that doesn't speak up. At this point, who do we have left but ourselves? And you know what? When the American people have had to do this in the past, every freaking time they have stepped up and they have recreated the idea of American democracy. They did it in the 1850s. They did it in the 1890s. They did it in the 1930s. They did it in World War II. They began to do it in the 1960s. We can do it again today, because at the end of the day, all democracy is it's the idea that people have a right to work hard and create their own destiny, their own end. And what we are seeing here in this moment is MAGA Republicans saying, no, no, we don't actually think that you have the right to have a say in your government or to be treated equally before the law. We believe that we, a few dictators and one dictator overall, get to determine your future. That has never flown in society. It's certainly never flown in American society. And this is our moment to say it's not going to fly now, or at least to go down fighting. And I don't believe it's going to come to that. I really think that this is in our DNA and that we can do it. We just have to make sure that people understand the stakes. Look around you. How many of even the MAGA voters around you would say, yeah, I'd rather have a dictator? They don't think that. They wanted to make sure that people like them had a shot at a future. And at least the ones who weren't openly Proud Boys and so on. I'm trying to cut them a break here. But given the choice between a dictatorship and a democracy, I think most of them would choose a democracy. You saw it during the Civil War as well, when people who were virulently racist, anti-Black racist, came on board to defend democracy. We've done it in the past. We can do it again. I'm trying to look here. Somebody just said my next book maybe should look at the times that the American public has done this. My last book did. The whole third section of Democracy Awakening was the different ways in which people had managed to expand democracy, even in really bad times. So actually, I'm working on a new book that's going to be fun, actually. People are asking, you live in a blue state, what can you do? Contact any of the organizations that are working to defend rights, including, as I say, Red, Wine, and Blue, because you can get involved across the states in these, in different races. You can put pressure on in different ways. If you're in North Carolina, get involved this minute trying to defend the election of Allison Riggs to the state Supreme Court. She won. The Republican is trying to throw her out by throwing out at least 4,000 votes or as many as 60,000 legally cast votes. Get involved there. Get involved in Wisconsin. Wisconsin has an election on April 1st for a state Supreme Court seat. That needs to be held by a non-MAGA person, by a Democrat in this case, because that Supreme Court will determine whether or not Wisconsin will be gerrymandered within an inch of its life, so it only returns Republicans to office. Reach out to any of these organizations. Lots of people write to me saying they want to start stuff. I would urge you to make sure that there isn't already something out there doing what you're doing, because what people really need is support. And by that, I mean your time or your money, both of which are extraordinarily valuable. And if you don't have money to put into things, remember that your time is equally valuable. That's one of the things I always say to people. You know, there's two kinds of currency. One is time and one is money. And often the people who have a lot of one don't have much of the other. So whichever you've got, throw your oar in. Help independent media. I've talked about this before. Independent media is rising. Maybe you don't want to start your own web page about what's happening in your town. Find somebody else who is and say, you know what, maybe we can go together and I'll cover the school board meetings, you cover the basketball games, somebody else will cover, you know, the Department of Public Works, and we'll be able to inform people of what is happening in our towns. This is a moment for us to reclaim reality, so that we can't have a president who says he has had the army turn on the spigot of water in California. Do not even start me. It's crap. Somebody also wrote to me the other day and asked if it was true that Trump was calling out the Army Corps of Engineers to work in North Carolina. The answer to that is no. The Army Corps of Engineers has been there since the floods happened. They've cleared hundreds of millions of tons of debris. They've rebuilt all kinds of stuff. Trump is now saying he did that. That is a lie. Call that stuff out. There are all kinds of places we can be heard right now. We need to feel it and not say, oh, I'm scared, somebody else needs to do this. Think about it. 17,000 people here. Think of the difference we could make in just the next week if we all do things. It's okay to take a break, but make sure your voice gets heard. All right. I think that I'm going to leave it there. And somebody just said, what do you do in Florida? Again, you got plenty of pressure to put on places in Florida at the state level. Your state legislature is corrupt as hell. And same with Ohio and same with Mississippi. You can do a lot of good there just by dealing with your local legislators and saying, what are you doing here? Ohio's energy issue and all that, or Florida is finally starting to push back against Ron DeSantis. Cheer those people on. Demand that you get felons, that they actually honor the law that you all passed to get felons able to vote again. You just need to find your issue. All right. I somebody just asked how to watch me if you've quit Facebook. I am working on getting on YouTube and streaming to Facebook, and I'll keep trying to expand what I do. I got the impression you liked the short thing I did on Sunday. I will see if I can incorporate those more often. Things are coming at us awfully quickly. I will urge you once again, try and get enough sleep. You'll notice I'm posting the letters earlier, which means I'm not catching the 11 o'clock breaking news, but it does mean I'm getting sleep. Try and eat right, try and exercise, and try and laugh some, because as I say, a joyful population cannot be controlled. All right. Thank you for being here. And I will see you. I'm actually doing a big radio show at 5 o'clock, my time, somewhere. Don't remember where. Don't know what the topic is, but I will see you tonight in a letter, and I will see you again later on this week. Thanks for being here.